Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to our RIC Engaged Scholarship Award winners webinar. I'm Sandy Chan, Knowledge Mobilization Specialist at Research Impact Canada, and I'm thrilled to be your host today as we celebrate the outstanding achievements within our community of graduate students in Canada. Today, we have an exciting agenda lined up. First, we will talk very briefly about this award and its significance before announcing our winners. Then we'll turn it over to the winners themselves to present on their projects. Finally, we'll end it with some closing remarks. So I'm just going to get into some housekeeping very briefly before we start. If you would like to listen to this webinar in French, please feel free to select the interpretation button at the bottom of the Zoom bar and select the French channel. Closed captions have been enabled and this session will be recorded. So let's begin. Before we announce our winners, I just wanted to take a moment to reflect on the purpose and significance of this award. Each year, we recognize individuals who have demonstrated engaged scholarship principles through this award of excellence. Of course, the winners are exceptional scholars themselves, but they also exhibit qualities that show that their research moves beyond the traditional metrics of academia. They involve principles of reciprocity, identify community needs, democratization research, and boundary crossing, which often leads to increased awareness of research by diverse audiences beyond academia or changes in action, practices, guidelines, or policies. Engaged scholarship also consists of doing research in deep collaboration with the people who can benefit from it. The winners today will demonstrate how knowledge mobilization has supported engagement, collaboration, and knowledge exchange throughout and beyond the research process, with the result of achieving real-world impact. This award highlights the remarkable contributions that our engaged scholarships make to drive our communities forward. We have 4 winners in 2 categories to announce today. In the Doctorate or PhD category, our winners are Michaud from York University and Dina Idriss-Wheeler from University of Ottawa. In the Master's category, our winners are Bincy from the University of Waterloo and Ronessa Dass from McMaster University. Now, without further ado, let's turn it over to the winners to provide a brief introduction about themselves and to present their projects. The first winner to present will be Michaud from York University. So Liam, we'll let you take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Sandy, for that intro. I'm just going to get myself set up here.
No worries, take your time.
All right, you should be able to see my screen now. So yeah, thank you so much, Sandy, for convening us here today. Thank you also to Research Impact Canada for the recognition and support. Looking forward to the opportunity to share and learn from everyone and my co-presenters today. So my project is called Legal and Policy Ethnography in the Toxic Drug Overdose Crisis, Experiences of People Who Use Drugs, of Reforms Across Health and Justice Sectors. So I am a PhD candidate in the Socio-Legal Studies graduate program at York University. I'm also the graduate scholar at the Dedale Institute for Global Health Research. So I'll share a little bit about my project, how it came about, and where it's at currently. So the general focus is really on asking these 2 questions. So how institutions governing drug use and questions of drugs are responding to the shifting landscape of overdose mortality in Canada, and how people who use drugs are experiencing changes in drug laws and these institutional responses. So I kind of come at the study or the project from these 3 fields or disciplines. So critical legal studies, medical sociology, and policy studies. And so I think here there's a kind of shared preoccupation across these areas of study regarding the gap that often exists between formal laws and policies and how these laws and policies play out in people's lives, particularly for those experiencing different kinds of structural oppression. And these are the methods and sources I mostly draw upon. So primarily interviews with people who use drugs or who have been impacted by drug laws and overdose mortality, freedom of information, access to information requests, as well as case law research. And so perhaps I'll just take a moment to note here a couple of articles co-written with some colleagues related to the themes of the project. I think the common thread across this work is about how people's experiences of drug law enforcement provides us with crucial insights into how those institutions function, how they are adhering to specific policies, and how people's experiences of their legal rights operate in those settings. And so I guess to share a little bit of context in terms of how this project came about and my relationship to it, I worked in healthcare for a number of years with people who use drugs and others in conflict with law, mostly in street-based settings, shelter-based settings, prison settings. And so while I was working mostly in a health capacity, it was very clear to me that the legal determinants of people's health and well-being remained largely unaddressed by existing responses. And so it'll come as no surprise to everyone here that Canada is in the throes of an entrenched toxic drug crisis, resulting in declining life expectancy as well as accidental overdose as a leading cause of death for a growing number of groups, including in many Indigenous communities and as well as men in my age cohort. So in terms of just kind of the framing or a little bit of context for this, so of course, the policy landscape in Canada regarding drugs is characterized by substantial and long-standing tensions. And so while we might be more familiar with the scale up of certain program or policy interventions recently motivated by health-based goals, such as the scale up of certain harm reduction services or the drug decriminalization pilot project in BC, criminal legal responses have also deepened. And so we can see this with respect to the effects of drug enforcement and street level policing of subsistence economies on health outcomes and well-being of people who use drugs, including access to healthcare, overdose mortality, et cetera. We also see this in terms of an increase in sentencing ranges for people engaged in distributing, sharing, or selling unregulated fentanyl. And we also see this in the form of the emergence and rapid acceleration of homicide charges brought against people who use and who provide, share, or sell drugs that have led to an accidental overdose. And so this last area is the focus of a forthcoming article in the Canadian Journal of Law and Society. And so I guess I was asked to share how I and the project more generally orient to partnership, community engagement, participatory research. And so I'll share some thoughts here. I think of course, part of this is always inevitably going to involve an awareness of our institutional power and complicity and the social capital we inevitably hold as researchers and academics. And in my case, coming to this as an uninvited settler, conducting research on a topic that's deeply intertwined with people's experiences of colonial dispossession. So whether this plays out in terms of the sometimes extractive dynamics of policy research or the extraction of individual stories for our consumption. I think this is a dynamic that can often be present in research looking at people's experiences of structural violence. And so I think it's really, in many ways, just about orienting toward it in a way that, strives to create a different dynamic, understanding that there's inevitably going to be challenges and missteps along the way. So here I take my cues from and am influenced by things that have been taught to me from both Indigenous colleagues in previous roles as a community worker, or that I've learned from scholars and thinkers, particularly around non-interference and reciprocal recognition as kind of guiding relational framework in terms of how to approach the project and research more generally. All of this is informed by recognizing lived experience as a form of knowledge and evidence, right? In addition to expert knowledge and other forms of evidence, and an acknowledgement of people as knowledge producers through their everyday life and their interactions with institutions. So I wanted to share just a resource in terms of practices that work toward the non-replication of the research harms that I just mentioned. Principles have been developed by impacted communities and across all sorts of sectors. In this case, I'm sharing a resource by an organization called the Vancouver Area Network of Drug Users. And so similar models exist, but I think this is a kind of interesting example. And so I won't read this out, but I think on a practical level, sometimes this, as a researcher, this can also include facilitating processes and sharing resources with groups so they can have discussions amongst themselves before deciding whether or not to work with you, understanding that depending on the, how formally that group's organized, that might already be established or that might have yet to be determined. So a couple more reflections I'd like to share in terms of approach or strategy and how I think about engaged research. Think about it in terms of being attuned to political context and windows of opportunity, in terms of influence, in terms of influencing laws, practices, policies in ways that might align with the needs of those with whom you're collaborating based on what they've identified as a need. I think one of the main pretenses or illusions we traffic in as researchers, especially in policy spheres, is that we generate evidence and governments or policymakers make policy based on that evidence. And so while this has arguably never been the case, at least not consistently, especially in drug policy, where evidence is often used opportunistically, selectively, at times weaponized. And so we're seeing this play out in quite an acute way in Canada at the moment. And so another way in which I orient to this is thinking about community-based research models, some of the strengths and limits of them as well. So thinking about kind of more formalistic CBR models that privilege partnerships with formal organizations, for instance, health service providers, and how this can create certain kinds of gatekeeping dynamics. So as someone who does research that engages questions of health, access to health, related barriers, this means recognizing that there's always going to be structural issues around access, who that organization is representing, recognizing that many people in conflict with law avoid formal services. And so just being cognizant of those dynamics. And then just on a practical level, engaging people in conversations early on and about what might be useful for them, what kinds of inquiry is relevant and needed for them. And so I think that can also play out in terms of, during an interview or when building that initial relationship, just being explicit about sharing my relationship to the issue, what brought me here, what's my stake, both in terms of transparency, but also so people can kind of orient to me accordingly. One more point I wanted to raise here, and this is in relation to research that I do with primarily communities in conflict with law, is what I see as the importance of engaging in recognizing, in orienting critically to institutional ethics. So recognizing that there's an institutional ethics framework, and then there's a kind of relational ethics framework or other kinds of ethics frameworks that we're going to be straddling. And so recognizing that institutional REB processes are often oriented toward managing liability for dominant institutions that can, and that these can unintentionally aggravate legal risks for individuals, especially people in conflict with law. And so turning to approaches established by other researchers that are sensitive to legal risks. And here I'll flag the work of Alex McClelland and Chris Bruckert, among others who've done interesting work around confidentiality and research ethics among criminalized communities. So coming back to my project, in terms of the next steps and knowledge mobilization, the project received SSHRC funding to develop several toolkits. One for legal practitioners, which is going to assemble case law, social context evidence, and another toolkit for impacted communities, namely harm reduction workers and people who use drugs. So this is going to really focus on legal literacy, access to justice, hopefully contribute toward developing responsive messaging, kind of integrating health and legal knowledge together because people's experiences of them are so intertwined. And so the goal here is, of course, to develop some tools that might respond to a particular stated need, that people have been identifying to me over the course of the last couple of years, and creating something around which practitioners and impacted people might be able to convene and leverage around developing other strategies, both for addressing the structural drivers of overdose death, as well as the legal determinants of health. So So I'll close there. Feel free to reach out if you're interested in learning more about the project. And thanks again.
Thank you, Liam, for that wonderful presentation. I see there's a few applause icons that are popping up on the screen. We really appreciate it. If anyone has questions for Liam's project, please hold them until the end just because of time. We want to make sure we listen to all the presentations first, and then if there's time left over for Q&As, we can do that. Okay. Thank you, Liam. So next up is going to be Dina Idriss-Wheeler from the University of Ottawa.
Thank you. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
So good. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Liam, great presentation. My name is Dina Idriss-Wheeler, and today I'm honored to present on our research on exploring intimate partner violence and access to services in Ontario's journey from pandemic lockdown to recovery, and it's from the perspectives of IPV survivors and violence against women service providers. So before diving into any details, I do want to take a minute to acknowledge the invaluable contribution of this project's partners. Marlene Ham, who's the executive director, and Lauren Hancock, who's the policy and research coordinator at the Ontario Association of Interval and Transition Houses, have been amazing partners throughout the past 4 years and are essential in the guidance and insight in every step of this project. And of course, I want to ask to express my gratitude to my supervisors, Dr. Ziad Al-Khatib and Sani Yahya, for their mentorship. And Sandy, special thank you to you for convening us. And finally, to sincere thanks to Research Impact Canada for this award. So with this land acknowledgement, I pay respect to the Algonquin people who are the traditional guardians of this land and acknowledge their longstanding relationship with this territory here in Ottawa, which remains unceded. And I'm grateful to be here and recognize there's so much work to be done collectively to make meaningful change. So I thought I'd provide you with a little bit of an overview of my research, talk about the engaged scholarship approach, and provide some preliminary findings just for interest, and then talk about impacts and lessons learned at the end. So just a brief bio. I immigrated from Lebanon in the late 1980s. After fleeing the Civil War with my family, we bounced around countries in Saudi Arabia, England, France, and then eventually settled here in Canada in 1988. In terms of education, I went to Queen's, did an undergrad in life science, then master's in reproductive biology, and then ended up with another master's at Ottawa U in health admin, and then worked at McMaster University for close to 13 years in their global health office. While raising a family, I had always wanted to do a PhD, and then I eventually now have 3 lovely children. They're 15, 13, and 11, and in 2019, I decided to go back to school to do my PhD in population health here in Ottawa U. So I'm my 5th year and hoping for it to be my last, so wish me luck. So what is my motivation to do this work? My personal experience with the violence of civil war in Lebanon and challenges faced in adult relationships in my early 20s influenced my commitment to do this work. So much of my lens is in a population health, health equity, and I'm motivated to do this work because of the social justice and human rights aspects related to individuals who experience violence. In terms of social justice, IPV leads to health and socioeconomic inequities. Individuals who experience IPV are at a disadvantage and across several social, health, and economic conditions. They have lower mental, physical, sexual, and reproductive health outcomes, and they face barriers to labor force participation and access to health and social supports. In terms of human rights, IPV violates the right to life, health, personal freedom, and security, as well as the right not to be tortured or exposed to other inhuman, cruel, and degrading treatment, as stated by the UN Declaration on Elimination of Violence Against Women. So what is intimate partner violence? It refers to behavior of any intimate partner or ex-partner that causes physical, sexual, psychological harm, including physical aggression, sexual coercion, psychological abuse, and controlling behaviors. This can be in marriage, common law dating relationships, in same-sex or opposite sex, at any time during the relationship, including when it's breaking down or after it has ended. So IPV is a global health problem. Even before COVID-19, the WHO reported 1 in 3 ever partnered women experienced IPV globally. In Canada, 1/3 of police reported crimes are of IPV, and 80% of victims are women from male perpetrators. And with COVID and lockdown measures, existing issues were amplified, and we heard the shadow pandemic everywhere, locally, nationally. All the papers highlighted IPV during COVID-19, talking about the lack of access to services, socioeconomic and health inequalities, and isolation. So I wanted to look at COVID-19 lockdown measures, how they affected individuals' experience of IPV, how that impacted their health outcomes, and how that impacted access to formal and informal supports from perspectives of both survivors and the violence against women service providers. So this involved understanding the process of accessing services, looking at facilitators of barriers, and then exploring factors associated with all of these outcomes. So we used a mixed methods approach, and this included semi-structured interviews with survivors and service providers, as well as survey of Ontarians. And this was done through a community-based approach and using principles of engaged scholarship, which I will expand on next. So community-engaged research is an important aspect of this work with OAITH, and OAITH is a coalition of first-stage emergency women's shelters, second-stage housing organizations, and community-based women's organizations who work towards ending violence against all women. We worked together from the inception in designing the study, in tool creation and testing of the tools, through recruitment, dissemination now as we're analyzing and planning to disseminate the results. As I mentioned in the beginning, I work closely with Lauren and Marlene throughout the project, and we continue to do so as we near the end, and we've been working together on this since 2020. With this slide, I wanted to highlight some key principles of our engaged scholarship that guided our work together, including reciprocity, mutual respect, and shared learning. In fact, the slide was, and this presentation was done with OAITH together. So community-engaged research is an incredibly valuable approach to conducting research, especially among hard-to-reach populations, such as IPV survivors. This partnership bridges the gap between academia and what is happening on the ground, ensuring the research remains relevant and applicable to all the lived experiences of both survivors and service providers. So the partnership has also helped to facilitate recruitment for this research due to the longstanding relationship and rapport that OAITH has with its member organizations who are providing these services throughout the province. So service providers were also able to support local recruitment efforts for the research by sharing and providing opportunities for survivors to participate within this research. Many of the organizations are keen to support research efforts, as they know this can have positive impacts on the systems and survivor outcomes. In fact, participants discussed how they felt empowered by sharing their stories in the hopes that this may contribute to the outcomes that may benefit others. Additionally, violence against women service providers possess valuable expertise and perspectives that is shared and incorporated in the research analysis and interpretation. As I mentioned, the feedback and guidance on interview and survey questions, as well as the results, have been invaluable in situating the findings in appropriate context. And this helps determine the type of knowledge mobilization strategies. So we would like the data to be accessible to a variety of audiences in addition to academia. So this would include the VAW organizations, the general public, IPV survivors, as well as government through advocacy, hopefully. So we've discussed webinars with several of our organizations who were interviewed. They expressed an interest in us coming to present to their boards and their clients as well. So while the community engaged research process may take longer to conduct, we feel that the importance and relevance and richness of this type of engagement and research conducted far outweighs these challenges and limitations. Oops, sorry. So I just wanted to actually give you a snapshot of some of the findings out of interest. I won't go through them in any detail. I'll just give you a snapshot. And if you're interested in any of the findings, feel free to contact me later. But so we had a total of 24 interviews, 14 with survivors and 10 with service providers. For the survey, we have had over 1,300 respondents, 23% of whom indicated they experienced violence during COVID-19. So based on respondents, as we all expected, IPV was worse during COVID-19. Isolation and control were a key theme from the interviews of both survivors and service providers. From the survey, 42% said that they were kept from seeing family and friends. 32% said that they were kept from having access to a job or employment opportunities. So technology was an interesting element. There were pros and cons. So survivors discussed control and harassment, while service providers discussed technology as providing a means or an ability to reach survivors during isolating times. From the survey, 36% of the survivors who responded said they had experienced technological and digital violence. I think it's no surprise that housing is a key theme. This was an issue brought up by both survivors and service providers. According to the survey, significantly more survivors of IPV reported barriers to accessing housing during COVID-19 than none. And this is still maintained post-pandemic. So one of the questions we asked was around information about available services, and we found significantly more of the IPV survivors said they did not have enough information, and this has implications for reaching survivors during disasters or emergencies. Same with experiencing barriers to accessing services. IPV survivors were more likely to experience barriers across several services and supports. And significantly more survivors reported worse physical and health outcomes during COVID-19, and more respondents who were survivors of IPV identified as racialized or Indigenous. So when we talked to the service providers, a few things came up. I won't go through all the details, but I just wanted to highlight how providers discuss facing difficulties in building relationships and delivering trauma-informed care because of the increased isolation and barriers. There were resource constraints, the housing crisis worsened, and this limited survivors' ability to leave the actual shelters, which then reduced the ability of others, survivors trying to flee, to go into shelters and so forth. So it was an issue, and transportation was an issue, especially in remote areas. The strain of adapting to public health measures for the service providers was huge. Staff reported feelings of isolation, disconnection, and so forth. So all related to pandemic-related risks. So we identified key barriers and facilitators from both the providers and survivors. I won't go through in detail, but I did want to highlight a few things. So some critical post-pandemic barriers include the ongoing lack of affordable housing, limited shelter space, and limited access to mental health services. We had financial strain and rising living costs, which intensified during the pandemic and now persist, further straining under-resourced VAW services, and increasing barriers for survivors trying to escape violence. So what were the impacts? We believe this research enhances our understanding of IPV during the pandemic and how service providers can support survivors during isolation and in recovery. It offers insights for handling disruptions and support access during crises, with potential application, hopefully, to remote and underserviced areas across Canada. The findings inform risk assessment and safety protocols for addressing psychosocial and health impacts of IPV, helping tailor interventions for survivors. Involving IPV survivors and service providers in the research, we're hoping ensures the insights are practical and they're grounded in real-world challenges. And then the results can inform programming and advocacy for the violence against women organizations, improving planning and decision-making. I just wanted to highlight our efforts in knowledge co-creation dissemination. We've actively participated in conferences, conference posters and presentations together as a team, presenting from both perspectives. We are currently drafting infographics and fact sheets tailored for OAIF membership, and we're planning targeted webinars and presentations for the OAIF members and their network across the province. As well as I mentioned, some of the service providers who we interviewed and who participated in the research have asked for presentations to their boards and local networks and their clients as well. And then finally, we're also working on manuscripts for academic publications. So this experience has underscored the value of meaningful engagement in research with 3 key lessons learned for me. First, true partnership must go beyond transactional interactions. They're rooted in mutual respect and a shared vision for change. Second, research must genuinely reflect the community's needs from the start, leading to assured ownership of the outcomes. And lastly, the traditional academic focus on publications and funding can conflict with the time-intensive nature of community-engaged research. So despite this, the relevance and richness of this engagement far outweighs those challenges. So I do want to acknowledge the survivors and violence against women service providers who shared their stories with us. This work would not be doable without them. And then the community partners, Marlene and Lauren, who have been amazing from OAIF. Again, my supervisors, Ziad and Sandy, and we did receive funding from the Partner Engaged grant from SHRC. So I want to acknowledge that and thank you, Research Impact Canada, for this award. And congratulations to Liam, Bincy, and Ronessa as well. And thanks, Sandy, for this opportunity to present. And please feel free to email me with any questions if you have any.
Thank you, Dina. That was such a wonderful presentation. And we see applause coming from the others as well. So thank you for that. So I know Dina has to run for a personal appointment, but if you have any questions for her presentation, feel free to keep them. We will definitely save them and send them to you, Dina. Thank you.
Thank you.
And so our next presenter is Bincy Baby from the University of Ottawa.
Thank you, Sandy. I will just share my slides.
Sorry, I meant to say Bincy Baby from University of Waterloo. I think I mentioned the wrong institution earlier. Sorry about that, Bincy.
No problem. So hello, everyone. Thank you for being here today. My name is Bincy Baby, and I'm a recent graduate from School of Pharmacy at the University of Waterloo. I'm really grateful to Research Impact Canada for this opportunity to present my work and as well as for the award. So before we dive into the presentation, I like to share a little about my background since it's kind of closely related to the project I am presenting today. I moved to Canada as an international student in 2022. Before that, after completing my PharmD degree from India, I worked as a neurology clinical pharmacist. So during that time, I observed the significant challenges that older adults with neurological conditions face when managing their medications, often due to their physical and cognitive challenges which are related to the conditions they have. And these challenges often lead to early transitions to assisted living facilities. So seeing these issues made me think about finding ways to help them, especially using technologies to simplify medication management. So this interest led me to join for master's degree under the supervision of Dr. Teja at the University of Waterloo. So our lab basically focuses on researches aimed at simplifying medication management for older adults using technological solutions. So today I will be presenting my master's thesis work titled User Experience with Medication Adherence Technology, Determining Usability by Capabilities. So this presentation includes a brief introduction to the research topic, explaining concepts like medication adherence technology, usability, user experience, and also details about how stakeholder engagement and knowledge dissemination activities were incorporated at various phases of this project, including phase 1A, phase 1B, as well as phase 2. So starting with a brief info about this topic. So according to the recent reports by Statistics Canada, the percentage of older adults aged 65 years and older is expected to increase. And if you look at this population, one of the major challenges they face is like chronic disease, like increasing number of chronic disease. So increasing number of chronic disease can lead to complex medication regimen. That's like people taking multiple medications and multiple times a day. So this can further leads to decline their ability to self-manage medication at home and also contributing to various medication-related problems such as non-adherence, which is people not taking medication as prescribed by their provider, and also errors in taking medication, which can further contribute to hospitalizations, increased healthcare cost, etc., and eventually move into the assisted living facilities. So as we know, most of our older adults wish to stay in their home as they age. But these challenges can prevent them from achieving this wish, that's like aging at their own home or their own place. So if you look at the interventions to address this challenge, there are several in place. And one of them is technology-assisted medication management. And one of the technological solutions is medication adherence technologies. So if we define medication adherence technology, we can say that as any device, software, or equipment that can support medication management by providing reminders to take medication, dispensing medication, organizing medication, tracking the intake of medication, as well as reporting the adherence related to medication intake. Currently, there are two types of medication adherence technologies available in market, electronic and smart. If we look at smart devices, they are more advanced with features like having connectivity and automaticity options. However, if we look at technologies, one of the problems with medication adherence technologies is that most of the available technologies varies in terms of their design, function, and features. So making them different from each other, which can also lead to the fact that how they are going to the fact that how they are being used is also different. And if you look at the older adults, they often have various functional limitations such as physical challenges, cognitive challenges, and sensory challenges, which may be due to their chronic illness or as can be a part of their aging process. So these challenges can significantly influence how they use these devices. To give an example, for an older person with visual impairment, a device that produces a visual alert to signal medication intake time may not be effective. However, a device which produces an audio alert might be more suitable. So therefore, when selecting a medication adherence technology for an older person, it's important to consider some factors. Product factors such as usability. Usability means how easy and user-friendly a product is. And user experience include all aspects of user interaction, including their emotions, perception, beliefs, physical and psychological response when they use a device or a technology. And apart from these product factors, it is also important to consider the capabilities and abilities of a user. For example, their physical abilities like their hand grip strength, cognitive abilities, sensory abilities to determine if they can actually use a device. So we designed this study with the aim to identify the most suitable medication adherence product for older adults based on their diverse physical, cognitive, sensory, motivational, and environmental abilities to medication taking. So this study is more about matching the abilities of a person, of a older adult, with the most appropriate technology to ensure that the technology chosen or selected for that particular person is the best one or the most usable one. So starting with the phase 1A of this project. So phase 1A of this project was a scoping review we conducted to identify tools through which we can measure the abilities or the barriers to medications and management at home. So during this phase, two knowledge users, patient partners were involved. So I worked with various stages of the study, including study selection, screening, and data abstraction. So we met regularly to discuss which studies to include, as well as what kind of data to abstract. So their involvement contributed significantly to the phase in several ways. Firstly, it helped me to gain a better understanding of the needs and concerns of older adults when it comes to managing medications at home. And also their personal lived experience were also crucial in identifying tools that are essential for measuring the problems they came across during their day-to-day medication management. So coming to the knowledge mobilization activities at this phase, we have published one manuscript which was reviewed and given feedback by the knowledge users, including patient partners in this study. And we also disseminated knowledge through various posters, podium presentations, which was co-presented with the knowledge user. And we also have podium presentations and social media posts. So moving to the phase 1B of this study, this phase involved a development of a classification system for medication adherence technologies based on an inventory of characteristics and features of existing technology. So as we discussed before, the medication adherence technologies available in the market varies in terms of their features, design, and function. However, there is no classification system that groups them based on their features. For instance, if a person with Parkinson's disease wants to purchase a device with large buttons, there is no guide available that indicate which device have this feature. So this classification was developed in order to address this kind of concerns. The stakeholders involved in this phase were a bit different. During the validation phase of the classification system, we engaged with different field experts, including engineers, physicians, pharmacists, and patient partners. So their involvement were greatly beneficial in different ways. So they provided us the practical insights about the real-world challenges faced by older adults when it comes to managing using technologies, as well as help us to ensure the usability of this classification system across different disciplines. So to give a more insights into how they contributed, this is a brief overview of the classification system we developed. It's organized similar to our other taxonomies like the animal taxonomy, with the major dimensions followed by subdimensions and then multiple characteristics. So as you can see here, we have seven different dimensions, which is indicated by the red numbers. So for example, if you look at the seventh dimension, which is integration, our healthcare providers and patient partners helped us define most of the characteristics included under this dimension. To give an example, patient partners mentioned the importance of IT support on devices to ensure that help is available if they came across any kind of difficulties while they use these technologies at home. And when it comes to healthcare providers, they suggested that the ability of devices to integrate with electronic health records as well as other devices is crucial if you look at it from a clinical practice point of view. So about the knowledge dissemination activities for this phase, the manuscript for this study is in progress, and we have one abstract published along with 2 poster presentations at international and national conferences as well as social media post. So moving on to the phase 2 of this project, it involved user experience and usability testing of 3 smart and 10 electronic medication adherence technologies in all adults with diverse physical, cognitive, sensory, including vision and hearing, motivational and environmental barriers to medication taking. So unlike other usability studies, which typically involve 5 to 10 participants, in this study, we recruited 96 older adults with various barriers to medication taking. So the breakdown of barriers among participants is given below. We had 21 participants who had cognitive impairment, 23 with vision impairment, 50 with hearing, 34 each for motivation and environmental barriers. So briefly about the procedures we followed a 3-step approach. The first step involved measuring the barriers or the abilities of a person for their medication self-management. And this was done through using different tools we identified from the phase 1A scoping review. And the second step was involved all adults using different technologies in our lab, that's different medication adherence devices in our lab. And the third step included a semi-structured interview to gather more details about the feedbacks, more details like the feedbacks of participants regarding the technologies they tested. So when it comes to the stakeholder engagement for this piece, among the different 3 smart devices we tested, 2 smart medication adherence devices were provided by our industrial partners. And apart from this, we also invited one of our patient partners to observe the study procedures, and their feedbacks were incorporated to ensure that the procedures used in the study were not too much demanding for the participants of the study. And at this page, for dissemination, we used an approach that combined both knowledge dissemination and recruitment. So we conducted 11 knowledge dissemination and outreach activities at various locations, including several Shelgill villages across Ontario, KW Seniors Day Program, KW Seniors Fair 2023, etc. So during these presentations, we engaged with all adults to address their concerns related to medication management at home, introduced to various medication adherence technologies available, and then invited those who might be interested to test different devices in our lab. So for this phase, the data analysis is still ongoing, but some of the results from the preliminary analysis is provided here. So let's take an example. For example, a person who is male and taking 29 different medications, 3 different medical conditions with different impairments such as cognitive, physical, hearing, and motivational, environmental. So when it comes to using different medication adherence devices, this person has more than 87% probability in successfully performing various medication adherence technology tasks like scrolling through screen options and locating and touching an icon or button or an app on a screen. So, but if you look at the table, we can see that when it comes to tasks which requires more physical effort, such as tearing a package or flipping a device, their success rates drop to less than 50%. So what we are going to do this data is that as a part of phase 3 of this project, one of the PhD students in our lab is developing an evidence-based informed decision-making guide. So by using this guide, just by simply providing the demographics, clinical information, as well as the barrier characteristics of a person, it is possible to identify their probability of success in performing various tasks related to using medication adherence devices. So by this way, we can identify the most suitable device for a person based on their abilities as well as their demographic profile. So before I conclude, I would like to acknowledge my supervisor, Dr. Tejal Patel, thesis advisory committee members, external research team, as well as my team members who helped me at different stages of this project. as well as the funding sources, a National Research Council of Canada and Canadian Institute of Health Research, Canada, as well as other scholarship funding options I received the last 2 years. So thank you for listening to this presentation. If you have any questions about the study, please contact me at b3baby@uwaterloo.ca. Thank you.
Thank you, Bincy, for that amazing presentation. So once again, if there are any questions for Bincy, we will leave them at the end during the Q&A. And then last but not least, we have Ronessa Dass from McMaster University.
I muted. 1 second, sorry. Okay, can everyone see this okay?
Yes.
Perfect, and it's just the slide, right? No notes?
Yep. Mhm.
Okay, perfect. Thanks so much. So hi, I'm Ronessa Dass. I'm an incoming master's and or occupational therapy and PhD student at McMaster University. And today I will be presenting some of my master's thesis work, which was funded by the Chronic Pain Center of Excellence for Canadian Veterans and focus on exploring brain fog in veterans with chronic pain. So diving right in, brain fog is most commonly defined as a state of mental cloudiness, and it's associated with issues with mental processing, attention, and memory. And veterans are actually more likely to experience brain fog because it is a symptom to many conditions that are common to them. So these are things like pain, mental health, and traumatic brain injury. And pain is actually one of the most common symptoms seen in veterans and is seen twice as often in veterans than in civilians, with 1 in 5 veterans reporting chronic pain. And in fact, pain is so common that veterans aren't really bothered by how intense it is, but more so how much it interferes with their ability to do the things that they value. And part of this is because of a cultural mindset that's referred to as military identity. So I could give a whole other talk discussing what this is, but in short, it kind of refers to this mission first, self last mindset that reinforces perseverance and goal attainment and also shapes how a veteran views themselves and their well-being. And because we're really interested in well-being in the study, we use this really helpful framework from Veterans Affairs Canada, which outlines things like health, meaningful purpose, and social integration. Now, why do we look at brain fog in the first place? So for years now, people with lived experiences have been talking about brain fog on online discourses and things like social media. So this really presented us with the opportunity to do patient-driven research, identifying evidence supporting this experience. And we felt that this was very much needed within the case of veterans because they have unique experiences and worldview that can affect their perceptions of different health conditions. And they also have comorbidities, which make them a bit more vulnerable to things, and also a tendency to underreport their symptoms, which make their outcomes or outcome reporting a bit different from civilians. So because of this, we had 2 objectives for this study. We really wanted to understand what the impacts of brain fog actually were, and we also wanted to explore these impacts as well as the possible mitigation of pain interference on quality of life outcomes. So our first step in the study was in this project was a qualitative descriptive study. And we also worked with a veteran partner, Susan Clark-Tizard, who was really helpful in helping us figure out which questions to ask, how to ask them, and also was involved in the analysis process. And this was really helpful because veterans do have differences in how they communicate. And also they use like different types of terminology and language that was really helpful for us to consider in our analysis. And in particular, we wanted to see what are the triggers, impacts, and management strategies. And because veterans are a very solution-driven group, we wanted to see if they have any suggestions on improving the management of brain fog. And also, because women veterans are underrepresented in the literature, we wanted to explore any trends in gender. So we work with veterans to create this definition of brain fog. So here we have brain fog is a phenomenon of fluctuating instances of mental cloudiness. It may produce cognitive and emotional impacts, leading to difficulties with completing daily tasks and goals. And the impacts of brain fog can act reciprocally to reinforce symptoms and defer from engagement with evidence-based strategies for comorbid conditions. Now that's a bit wordy, but not to worry, we have broken it down into its 4 main constructs. So what it is are those unpredictable instances of mental cloudiness. The impacts, which I said was cognitive and emotional, and a lot of the triggers go back to common health conditions that veterans might experience. So these are things like pain interference, mental health, and sleep problems. But it was also described to happen spontaneously, with some veterans not being able to identify any triggers or in situations of high cognitive load. And finally, a lot of the management strategies described go back to that well-being framework, with participants describing the use of things like social support, routine, and purpose finding. And when we looked a little bit closer at our data, we actually saw some reciprocal relationships between the triggers, impacts, and management strategies. So for example, of course, triggers cause impacts, but the impacts of brain fog can actually reinforce these triggers. So in this example, Martin described that when he had pain, he had brain fog. And when he had brain fog, it made it harder for him to do things like support his wife. And because he was unable to do that, he started to feel depressed. And because depression and pain are related, the more depressed he feels, the more pain, and the more pain, the more brain fog. So this created a very vicious cycle that was difficult to escape. And next, of course, we use management strategies to deal with the impacts, but the impacts of brain fog can actually make it harder to use these strategies. So in this example, Aiden described going back to school to help to deal with some of the emotional challenges of brain fog. But again, brain fog made it harder for him to do this. It made it harder for him to communicate with his peers, pay attention in courses, and even remember things on quizzes. And as he says here, this could lead to feelings of inadequacy or failure, which is very problematic in the veteran community as they are a goal-focused group typically. So next, we asked veterans if they had any suggestions to improve the management of brain fog, and many of them described that there was a huge lack of awareness of what it actually was. So they thought that a standardized definition would help them to understand and describe their experiences better. On a related note, not having any assessments or interventions was a barrier. And this is particularly problematic because brain fog is an invisible experience, and veterans are taught to push through unless there's something physically or tangibly wrong with them. So they thought that a comprehensive measurement would help to legitimize their experience a bit better, but is also a helpful tool for when they're trying to seek access to things like accommodations at work and school, or even specialized services. And finally, we saw some interesting trends in gender despite our smaller sample size. So in our study, women described having a huge strain on their identity because they were unable to do things like taking care of the children, household responsibilities, and going back to work. And men in the study actually described being able to offload a lot of these tasks to their women spouses. And from a traditional gender roles perspective, we know that these are roles that women tend to take on, and they don't have anyone that they can offload these tasks to. And in fact, when we asked women which management strategies they use, most didn't describe the use of any and instead advocated for their development in future work. This might also be because invisible conditions of women often go overlooked, but again, we only had 6 women in comparison to 19 men, so it'd be really interesting to explore this within a larger population, and it is something that we're focusing on in the next stages of our project. So now that we've described the impacts of brain fog, we wanted to see if there were any trends on these quality of life outcomes. So we worked with our veteran partner to help figure out which assessments we should use and what constructs we should look at. And based off of our discussions, we decided to look at health-related quality of life, functional cognition, and perceived level of confidence with abilities in veterans with brain fog and low pain interference to those with brain fog and high pain interference. And generally what we saw is that the people in the high pain interference and brain fog group generally showed more mental health symptoms, less physical health, and less perceived confidence with their abilities. So it does seem that pain interference seems to play a role in the relationship between brain fog. And we also saw that veterans in our qualitative study talked a lot about how they perceive themselves and their abilities. So we wanted to see if their confidence with their abilities was related to other quality of life outcomes. And what we saw is that the more perceived ability was correlated with less challenges with functional cognition, and less of it was correlated with less physical health, as well as more mental health symptoms. Sorry. So it does seem that there is a relationship between how people perceive themselves as well as their actual outcomes. However, I have to say that this was based off a very small sample size, and future research will be needed to confirm this relationship. So we're not trying to make firm conclusions, but rather generate hypotheses that can be tested in future work. Now, before I end this off today, I just want to talk about some of the key takeaways of this work. So first, by having this definition, we are contributing to raising awareness on this important topic. And this is needed because, as I said, brain fog is an invisible experience, and there is a stigma associated with invisible experiences. So by raising awareness, we're helping veterans be a bit more comfortable in having these discussions, and also educating healthcare professionals so they can take a more proactive role in supporting this population. And this is really needed because we can't solve anything if we don't talk about it. And next, I just want to discuss our implications for improving access to services. So in the pain world, our gold standard does require some sort of cognitive component. So these are things like pain neuroscience education. But if people don't have enough cognitive capacity, then they can't engage with these treatments. And this doesn't mean that we need to completely change the way we do things, but maybe be a bit more mindful in our approaches by using things like the multimodal delivery of educational materials, or by even just allocating more time in sessions. And next up, I want to talk about the referral process. So in Ontario, at least, you do need a referral to seek access to specialized services that could be potentially helpful. So these are things like occupational therapy. And assessments are typically used as a part of this process. But right now, a lot of our assessments are for more profound conditions like dementia. So people with brain fog often don't meet the threshold for having a cognitive impairment, and then they don't get access to these services. So by defining brain fog, we're one step closer to building these assessment. But in the meantime, this literature can be a tool that people draw on for when they're trying to seek access to things like accommodations at work and school, which are very important for overall participation. And finally, we just identified areas for future research, looking at the mechanisms and long-term impacts of brain fog, because to date, this has not been studied very well, at least in this population. So again, I just want to give a huge thank you to our veteran community and the participants who are very involved in helping us to create this definition, as well as the Chronic Pain Center of Excellence for Canadian Veterans who funded this work. Of course, our veteran partner who was very helpful in helping us create a lot of the knowledge products that we've created and that I'm happy to share if anyone is interested, and as well as a lot of the students and faculty at McMaster University who were instrumental in supporting this work. I've also included my email there in case anyone is interested or has any questions, but I'll also write it in the chat. Again, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to Research Impact Canada for this award, and huge congratulations to everyone else. And that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ronessa, for that fantastic presentation. We appreciate it. And so now we would like to open up the floor to the Q&A section of our, and I see some claps as well, and also for Bincy too. I would like to open up to the Q&A section now to the winners. So anyone in the audience who has a question, please feel free to jump in, to raise your hand, to drop your question in the chat, so that they will be able to answer your questions. I see here that Bonnie has said, this is for all the presenters. Thank you for the interesting tour through your research. I would like to know about how you incorporated knowledge mobilization throughout the research cycle, not just at the end of the project. Did you use any unique and interesting techniques or tools to share your knowledge? Were your stakeholders included at the table from the beginning of the research, like developing the research questions? Yeah, so we can all take turns answering this question. I know Dina has left because she had to run, but the remaining three winners are here. So if you want to turn on your camera, feel free to make this sort of like a panel. And I will let Liam go first. And then we'll move on to Bincy to answer the question, and then Ronessa.
Sure.
So the question is in the chat in case you need a refresher. Yeah, by Bonnie.
Great, thanks, Sandy. Thanks for that question, Bonnie. It's a great one. In my case, a lot of that happened pretty iteratively and informally, and that partly had to do with just the nature of my project, where I was kind of, in dialogue with, in some cases, communities that I was already connected with through previous work. In other cases, it was totally new relationships that were being built. So honestly, that really looked more like a series of kind of informal check-ins on a periodic basis with different groups. So sharing kind of findings as they were emerging. And then as I started to turn my attention to the questions of what kinds of outputs might be generated from the research, having, kind of informal needs assessment type conversations with some of the groups that had been more actively involved in the project, just to get their sense of what kinds of tools might be useful, right? What kinds of delivery formats might I kind of aim towards? So that progress is still kind of in motion, and more or less landed on these toolkits, but that is going to be accompanied definitely by, workshops, presentations, going back, spending time at drop-in programs, things like this. And that's going to look really different depending on the organization and what kind of works for them and their level of formal, how formal they are as an organization, right? So hopefully that answers your question somewhat. Yeah, thanks for that.
Thank you, Liam. We'll move it to Bincy to answer the question.
Sure. So in case of knowledge mobilization, like for the different phases of our project, for the phase 1A, the knowledge mobilization was started after the end of the study, like us doing presentations, manuscripts, and all. But in terms of phase 1B, also we started the knowledge mobilization after completing the study. But in case of phase 2, that's a user experience and usability study, we used an approach where we incorporated both the knowledge mobilization and recruitment, because we went to different locations across Ontario and conducted community outreach activities, including like presentations, where we showed different devices and had conversation with all adults regarding like their medication management issues. So it was a place where we shared details about our research and asked about their problems regarding medication self-management. So when it comes to stakeholder engagement, in the phase 1A, that's a scoping review, we involve the two patient partners in our research to determine the inclusion and exclusion criteria for the scoping review. And when the phase 1B, that's a classification system, the stakeholders were included during the validation of the classification system. And for the phase 2, the stakeholders were involved as industrial partners, as well as one of the patient partners were invited to observe the study procedures to get have feedbacks regarding if the procedures were not too much demanding for the people who participated in our study. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Bincy, and we'll pass it to Ronessa to answer the question.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks so much for asking that, Bonnie. That's a really great question. So I don't know if we used anything unique and interesting, but I'll kind of just give a brief overview of the process. So we actually got connected with Susan through the Chronic Pain Center of Excellence for Canadian Veterans. They sent out an email, and then Susan and I met and just realized that we had a very, common vision and goals, and started to work together with the project. So she was involved pretty much from the start. I showed her the ethics application. We went through some of the questions that we thought that we would ask. She helped me to reword them to make them, like just as an example, veteran communication is generally very direct. So she helped me make those questions a bit more direct and straightforward. She also helped me figure out what kind of assessments we wanted to use. So for example, something like a numeric pain rating scale, which is what's used very often in pain research, isn't really helpful for the veteran population because, as I said in my presentation, they're just so used to how intense their pain is. So she helped us figure out that pain interference might be something that's a bit more applicable to the population. We also involved other veteran members throughout the creation of the definition. So this was actually done through focus group discussions, and basically we had a preliminary definition on the screen, and we just kind of worked together to figure out if there's anything that we would want to tweak and anything they'd add based off of their experiences. And I guess also just at the end, we had prepared knowledge translation products together, just really wanted to focus on what we thought the key messages would be for that population. So really focusing on meaningful engagement and what we can do to support participation, because that is something that is generally very important for the veteran group.
Thank you, Ronessa. Are there any other questions from our audience members? Feel free to raise your hand, speak up, drop the question in the chat. Okay. I just want to give everyone else a turn first because I have questions for all three of you. So I'll address the first one to Liam first. So from the toolkits that will be devised for the legal practitioners and frontline harm reduction workers and healthcare workers you discussed at the end of your presentation, can you briefly describe what approach you would take with each one to fit their needs, since there are two completely different fields? And I know this part is coming later into the later stage of your project, but if you have any ideas on how your research findings would be translated into that toolkit, just because through knowledge mobilization, these two different audiences would obviously use different language, have a different understanding, and how their role would actually play in helping the users that were part of your project. Yeah.
Thanks, Sandy. Yeah. So yeah, like you mentioned, this is I'm just at the beginning of this process, so many of the details are to be determined. And again, that's going to be very iterative, depending on the kinds of capacity, timing, skills that particular partners are able to offer at given junctures. Definitely, the fact that we received some support from SHRC is definitely going to help us, especially with harm reduction workers associations of people who use drugs, who might not necessarily have the kind of infrastructure or resources to support their participation in that kind of labor. And, so we'll be able to remunerate people for their time and efforts. A lot of that will probably be more conversational at first, right? Recognizing kind of diverse literacy levels, and eventually, working with people who kind of are more skilled than I am in kind of like visual, communication, modes of visual communication as well, to kind of make sure that's integrated throughout the toolkit. So yeah, I think with the harm reduction workers and people who use drugs, that's definitely going to be primarily focused on kind of like convening events, and more conversational, understanding that there's going to be also, disagreements that are kind of a kind of opportunity to kind of cohere around a particular vision, or potential tensions that might be important to address or keep in mind in terms of what's included or what's not included. In terms of legal practitioners, again, that'll be a different kind of convening. Generally, it's, we're talking about a group of people who are, often like heavily solicited, really busy. And so that probably is going to look just more individual, just pragmatically. And that's going to be a lot of kind of initial relationship building. I mean, some of those relationships I've developed through the course of the interviews, but many of those, there's not many existing networks of people in the legal field that are touching on this particular intersection of issues. And so I think it'll be an opportunity to see, to what extent that can kind of emerge in some kind of iterative, organic way through the process of consulting people themselves around what would be needed, what would not be needed. And it'll also be done in collaboration with the HIV Legal Network, which is a health justice organization working nationally. And so they have, a number of lawyers on their team, as well as, specific kinds of established networks. So hopefully that answers somewhat your question, but thanks for that, getting me started on thinking about how that, is going to look in practice.
Thank you, Liam. And for Bincy, so my question is, with more and more technology being developed to assist older adults, what are 1 or 2 or even 3 key takeaways you would suggest to ensure their needs are met? Because your project does talk about tailoring to their needs based on like their abilities and demographics, and that's really interesting and really important. So because there's so many of these technologies being developed to assist them, what are just some key takeaways you would recommend for them?
So that's an interesting question. So yeah, as you mentioned, the technology is kind of evolving. So like in our study, like we didn't look at like a particular technology. We like looked at the present technologies, like the technologies available currently, and try to include all the features. But like considering the fact that the technology is evolving, it's important to have like more research and have like more updates, like because the features are changing, and we have to see if they're all adults can use the new features. So I think it's like having more research like in the future as more technologies are evolving. Yeah, I think answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you, Bincy. And then Ronessa, for your question. So for the implications of defining brain fog, as mentioned in your presentation, some of the things were raising awareness, improving access to services, and putting research mechanisms in place. What are some actionable activities that you see stemming as a result of these recommendations to those groups of people?
That's a great question. So I guess raising awareness, that one's a little broad. We've done a couple of things, like we have a couple of presentations, conference presentations, even some legwork, as well as some social media campaign that we're in the progress of just finalizing. So those are some actionable items that we can see in the very near future. In terms of everything else, I'm afraid that they might be a bit far away, but there are some things that we could do now. So for example, things like, just having a bit more time in sessions, or even just asking about it in sessions, is something that's really helpful. Using things like appointment reminders to just try to make or multimodal delivery of educational material to just try to make the information and the type of care that we're providing a bit more accessible. I think that these are things that generally people tend to do. It's just that sometimes we don't have enough time and it slips our mind. So if we're just a bit more actively aware that this is a problem that people might be facing, I think that that's also a very feasible solution that could be implemented fairly soon. And we also actually, so we just got a grant from McMaster's Co-Equity and Design group, which will help us to actually create an assessment of brain fog, which could actually help us to be a bit more actionable. It could be actually tools that could be used as a part of the referral process. And we are actually seeking people to be a part of an advisory group that we are creating, so people with lived experiences. So if anyone knows anyone, or if you yourself are interested, you can shoot me an email.
Thank you, Ronessa. So we have one last question. It's from Bonnie. Have any of you used AI in your products, specifically generative AI, in developing and implementing knowledge mobilization? So I'll let you go first, Liam. I see you've answered part of her question already.
I'll admit to being not particularly tech literate, so it's not an area that I've been had an opportunity to explore much. That being said, I think especially in terms of developing kind of other kinds of communication tools and visual communication tools, it will be, an interesting kind of rabbit hole to go down. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing more what it might offer, how it might support the project.
Thank you. Bincy?
So thank you for the question. So for the knowledge mobilization, I don't think we didn't use any of the AI to for the mobilization, but we are thinking about a study where we can actually use AI to code the interviews we did with our participants, like the qualitative interviews. So that's kind of part we are thinking about using AI, but we didn't use anything for the knowledge mobilization.
Ronessa?
Yeah, I've heard of it throughout thinking about translating it to different languages, but I actually haven't heard of it being used that much. At least, I'm not familiar with it, but I actually am. I just started to Google it just now, so that is definitely something that I think would be really interesting and cool to do.
Thank you. Yeah, it's definitely AI and knowledge mobilization is actually something that's new and emerging. There's not a lot of information or out there yet. There's definitely tools people can use, and how to harness this tool for knowledge mobilization is something that's still yet to be explored and grappled. But that's a great question and great to think about it because AI is here. It seems to be here for the future as well. So it may be something that will have to be incorporated in our research projects maybe moving forward as one aspect of it. And Bonnie says that is my expertise. I wrote a handbook about it. Thank you. Ronessa is asking about the name of the book. If you could share that, Bonnie, that would be great. So on that note, congratulations to all of our winners today. Your achievements are a testament to your hard work, passion, and dedication. Thank you for sharing your work, and we know that your journeys onwards will be a great success from here on. We also want to extend our gratitude to the review committee for their time and efforts in thoughtfully reading and grading through all of the applications. As professionals in the field, they are deeply passionate about inspiring the next generation of researchers doing knowledge mobilization. Finally, we want to thank the other applicants who have applied for this year's award because every year we always get positive comments from the review committee saying that it's a joy to read the amazing projects from graduate students across Canada who are making an impact in the world through their research. As we wrap up, I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us today. We hope you enjoy this webinar and feel as inspired as we do by the incredible talent and dedication of our graduate student winners. We encourage you to reach out and connect with them. Lastly, in November of this year, we will announce the launch of the 2025 RIC Engaged Scholarship Award application process, so stay tuned for that. You can subscribe to our newsletter by going to our website or joining our social media channels on LinkedIn and Twitter. Until then, keep striving for excellence and making an impact. Have a wonderful day and congratulations once again to this year's award winners. Thank you so much, everyone.